In the spring of 1994, in a quiet town outside Columbus, Ohio, a man named Daniel Whitfield knelt beside his father's coffin, reached into the pocket of the old gray coat they were about to bury him in, and pulled out a photograph that would take him 30 years to understand. It was a woman, a stranger, someone Daniel had never seen in his life. And on the back, in handwriting that did not belong to his father, were 4 words that would follow him for the rest of his days. He knows your name. Daniel didn't know who wrote those words. He didn't know who the woman was. And he had no idea that the answer had been sitting in his own family for over 2 decades, waiting for the right moment to surface. This is the true story of how one photograph tore open a secret that an entire family had spent a lifetime trying to bury. And by the end of it, you'll be asking yourself the same question Daniel asked that night in the funeral home. How well do we really know the people who raised us? Daniel grew up the way most kids in that part of Ohio did. Modest house, church on Sundays, a father who worked at the same manufacturing plant for 26 years and rarely talked about anything before he met Daniel's mother. If you asked Thomas Whitfield about his childhood, he'd change the subject. If you asked about relatives, he'd say there weren't many left worth mentioning. Daniel's mother, Ruth, would go quiet in that particular way people go quiet when they're protecting something. As a boy, Daniel didn't think twice about it. Families have their quirks. It wasn't until he was a grown man, standing at his father's funeral, that the quiet started to feel like something else entirely. The photograph should have stayed in that coat pocket forever. Daniel almost put it back. But something about the handwriting bothered him, so he slipped it into his jacket instead, and that decision changed everything. When he showed it to his mother 2 days later, she didn't recognize the woman, or so she claimed. But her hands were shaking, and she left the room before Daniel could ask a second question. That night, an envelope showed up at his front door. No stamp, no return address. Inside was a second copy of the exact same photograph. Except this time, the handwriting on the back wasn't a message for his father. It had Daniel's own name on it, written 20 years before he was even born. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He kept turning the photograph over in his hands, staring at ink that had been placed there before he existed, by someone who somehow already knew who he'd become. The next morning, he drove to the county records office. He wasn't looking for anything specific yet. He just needed a name to attach to the handwriting, something to hold on to. What he found instead was a gap, an entire branch of his father's family that had simply stopped appearing in any record after 1968. No death certificate, no obituary, just silence, the same kind of silence his father had kept his whole life. He started asking around town. An elderly neighbor mentioned, almost in passing, that Thomas Whitfield used to have a brother. A brother nobody in the family ever spoke about, not even at holidays. Not even when Thomas himself had passed. Daniel began to suspect the woman in the photograph wasn't connected to his father romantically at all, but to this vanished brother instead. He chased that thread for days. It led nowhere. Then a retired postal worker in the next county recognized the handwriting immediately. It belonged, she said, to a man who used to run a small photography studio on Main Street. A studio that closed abruptly in 1969 and was never reopened. Daniel drove past the old studio that same afternoon. It had been converted into a laundromat years ago, but the second-floor apartment above it was still listed under the same owner's name in the county's oldest tax filings. The name on that filing was Walter Whitfield, his father's brother, the one nobody spoke of, the one who had apparently never left town at all. Daniel found him living 40 minutes away, in a small house at the edge of a cornfield, alone, in his late 80s, still developing photographs in a converted bathroom because he never trusted digital cameras. When Daniel showed him the photograph, Walter didn't ask how he'd found him. He simply nodded, like he'd been expecting this exact moment for 30 years. Walter explained that after a falling out with the family decades earlier, over money, over pride, over things that had long stopped mattering, he made a decision. He would never contact them again. But he also could not let go entirely. So every few years, quietly, from a distance, he photographed the family he was no longer allowed to be part of. Birthdays glimpsed through windows. School plays watched from the back row. A wedding he wasn't invited to but attended anyway, standing across the street in a coat, a stranger to everyone there. The woman in the photograph had worked in his studio decades earlier. He'd asked her, once, to photograph Thomas at a company picnic, just so he'd have something to remember his brother by. He wrote the note on the back that day, a message he always meant to send but never had the nerve to. When Daniel was born, Walter did the same thing all over again. He wrote Daniel's name on a photograph he never took, years before Daniel existed, simply because he already knew, somehow, that he'd want to remember this child too, even from the outside looking in. The envelope that showed up at Daniel's door wasn't a threat. It was an old man, watching the obituary pages, learning that his brother had finally died, and making one last attempt to say the thing he never said while Thomas was alive. Walter passed away 8 months after Daniel found him. In his house, they found boxes of photographs going back decades. Every one of them, the Whitfield family, living an entire life a few miles away from a man who loved them quietly, from the outside, until the day he died. Daniel says he doesn't know whether to be angry or grateful. Angry that an entire relationship was stolen from both sides of his family by pride that outlived its own reason. Grateful that in the end, the mystery wasn't a threat at all, but a decades-long act of love that never found the courage to introduce itself. He keeps the original photograph in his wallet now, not because he's afraid of it anymore, but because it reminds him that the people closest to us can carry entire hidden lives, and sometimes the only thing standing between a stranger and family is a single conversation nobody ever had the courage to start. Was Walter right to stay silent for 30 years, or did his pride cost the family more than either brother ever admitted, even to himself? Let me know what you would have done in the comments below. And if this story stayed with you, wait until you hear the one I'm about to share next.